on the DAO hack.
Yeah, that was crazy.
What happened with that one?
Laura Shin, the podcast of Unchained, she wrote a book talking about the DAO, and they exposed the hacker.
They exposed the
that's,
hacker.
That's nice.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Who was it?
Somebody that was heavily involved.
Oh,
Yeah.
shoot.
kind of close to Griff, I guess.
Greedy
but maybe
bastards.
not. I don't know. Yeah, it was the same guy that like came out with like the vulnerabilities of the DAO.
Oh, you mean he's the one who made it be known that they were there in the first place?
Yeah.
Oh, jeez.
But
All right.
yeah. Anyway,
sorry. No. Finish your thoughts.
No. It's just it's a good article in Forbes, but looking interested to read the book too. So we'll see.
The question for today, I had this conversation the past week, and I think it's relevant for the pamphlets and all this stuff, which is about governance. How will you bring awareness and engage about governance? Like, it's everyone who participates in a DAO meant to participate in governance, or that's something that should be optional? Like, how will you bring awareness about governance? On my case, I will start, and I, at the beginning when this question was thought, I initially believed that not everyone should participate in governance, but at the same time, everyone should be aware that it exists, a governance system or a governance model or the governance participation scheme. And the awareness should be brought out from the very moment someone enters the space, and facilitated the tools to know that it exists. So that was my answer to that question when I wrote it up. How about you, Nate? How will you? What do you think about governance awareness, and do you think everyone should be involved or not?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I think governance is one of those broad terms that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And so I think we have to be very particular about like how we define governance. And part of it you've addressed, which is education, understanding the tools that we have, the responsibility and obligations we have as token holders to manage this organization and the resources that we have. And then, I think a lot of I always go back and forth on that, Edu, with the idea that not everybody should be participating in governance, but I want people to participate in governance all the time. And one of the big things that we have to take into consideration is that participation in governance and in terms of like making decisions and actively voting on proposals and things of that nature is creating traditions, creating these voting rhythms. We all have our typical voting rhythms that we have within our municipal governments, or, every 2 to 4 years we go to the voting booth, we vote, and we all do it at the same time. And so like those voting rhythms have encouraged us to follow this type of pattern in participation. And so I think that creating good rhythms and good traditions around voting is very vital to good governance practices and having a high voter turnout. And so those are the things that I would like us to see us focus on, is creating these traditions and rhythms within voting so that we can have higher turnouts and more engagement within the community. But yeah, so it's one of those things. And in terms of governance as like decision making on a local level, like I don't think all things need to be voted on. I really don't. I think if we apply the advice process and making sure that we're going through utilizing the tools that we have available to us, we can make really good decisions on a local level. And if they need to be escalated, they can be. And so those are my thoughts. And I'll pass it over to Kyle.
Hey guys, yeah, I basically agree with everything that was said. I think the kind of most important aspect is definitely just education, providing people with the information that they need in order to make informed decisions and to vote in a way that is effective and efficient. And then whether or not they want to, I don't know that. I mean, I think that we want them to, want to do it, but I don't know that forcing people that otherwise wouldn't be comfortable or well suited for governance is kind of the move. But I'm on all fronts, like absolutely in pro education for that. I also definitely agree with the fact that like not everything needs to be voted on. I think like if there's an unresolvable disagreements that for whatever reason just can't be figured out with like perhaps a mediator or just bargaining or whatever, then perhaps it needs to be escalated to a vote system. But otherwise, I think voting should be saved for like larger, more structural changes as opposed to just like things that can basically be handled individually, kind of within a group setting. So yeah, I guess generally just kind of echoing everything Nate said, just completely agree, same page. And I pass it to Gustavo.
Hey guys, so I'm just reading here the question: how you bring awareness, encourage about governance, right?
Yes, Gustavo. And if you believe that everyone in the DAO should be involved in governance.
Okay. Well, based on my experience, I think has to do with how hard it is to understand how things work when you're new. At least for me, that's that. Like up until now, it's for me, it's not still clear enough. What is like the process? Where does it start? Where do proposals get created? Like who do you bounce off any thoughts with, like before any proposal gets created and that? And I think that is part of that difficulty of being like just being aware of that is going on. I still up until now being like 2 months just looking around and hearing everything. To me, it's still not perfectly clear how the process is. And yeah, I definitely think that for example, in terms of voting, it seems to me that it's easier to vote on like general, more like strategic things, and then more like the tactic or the day-to-day basis things. I don't think those should be voted. Because if you already agreed on like the strategy, if whatever you're doing is aligned with that, I don't think there's a need to slow it down through a process of voting. I think communication is important, and communicating that is very important, but I don't think that everything should be passed through a voting process. And yeah, I don't know who has not participated yet.
No worries.
Yeah, maybe you can pass it on to the next person. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Gustavo. I pass it on to Benz.
Thanks. I think I agree with what everyone's said so far. We probably need to do a better job of just making sure that governance process is really clear. Education is key, I think. And especially if we're saying that like we don't want everything to be a vote, I think we can get by, and it's much more efficient if we're kind of utilizing these non-vote processes like that, the advice process and things like that. But I think really the key to making that work is making sure that members are engaged and educated and engaged, because I think when they're not and we don't have that engagement and we are kind of away from voting in our processes, that opens things up to kind of just centralization to a couple people's opinions, but it's really just like based on default because people aren't engaged. I kind of have a pretty US centric view of government, but I kind of see that as like one of the problems here is that we have become disengaged in our own governance, and we've kind of like just kind of delegated that to someone else, and that's not something that aside from voting in big elections, a lot of people have time to engage with. So I will pass to Enti. Would you like to go?
Sure, thanks. Well, I think, mm, mm, I don't know. It's like, I think it's a bit tricky because uh, we also have to have in mind that TEC is probably like I guess it's meant to be complex and probably not for everybody, or at least not for people that's sort of starting off. But that being said, each community has sort of its process for voting. Some communities are like you go like some communities doesn't have like a rigid process for any kind of governance. You just post the proposal and it either passes or not. And what I feel like it's the TC is trying to push for the advice process that, as far as I know, is kind of the way we want to people to reach consensus on ideas, proposals, etc. Um, and I think that's what probably should be the focus. Um, I don't know to what extent is, I guess, the work of TC to educate uh, from the most basic principles of governance. But if the TC wants governance done a certain way, uh, you need to have you need to let know all the people involved what is the way that we want to have that process. And also, I think governance is going to also sort of mature or change as time goes because pretty much everyone who's here, I think it's kind of working for the TC in one way or another, contributing or whatever. But as the TC grows, the community will change, which will also change. Like right now, pretty much everyone knows how to work on TC because we are already contributing. We are on the loop. We know what's happening and what's not. But what's going to happen when we reach the level where we have less consistent contributors, for example, that may not be up to date on everything. And yeah, pretty much it. Pretty much that. I think I will pass it on to uh, Ratio.
Thank you, Auntie. I got, I don't know. Maybe my view will be a little bit different. I think if as far as the community definitely needs to be informed. If people feel like the community is not informed, then maybe certain things should be written in a way or a manner that is, I'm not saying elementary level, but a level that everybody can understand. I know it's kind of difficult to gauge. I also believe that if it's anything that affects a single person within a community, or it's dealing with the community treasury, it should be open to all people to vote. And what's going to happen, similar to what Inti was saying, is if the community is not involved, they're not going to know what's going on. So that kind of takes away from the informed level. And then if proposals or if proposals are being passed without community knowledge, then they'll definitely, that's kind of like you're disenfranchising members of the community. And that was, as far as retention, activity, that's definitely not going to be good for the commons. And there's so much else I could say about governance, but I'm going to go ahead and pass them on.
I don't know if it's me or you're breaking up.
Oh yeah,
I hear you.
I don't know if it's just you or somebody or other people as well.
You're fine, Ratio.
Oh, then it's me. All right, sorry.
Okay. Like I said, I've got a lot to talk about on governance and my personal views on it, because I see there's a lot there are a lot of communities that discount the members of their communities because there are particular working groups or people who are in power or in a leadership position or in an influential position, and community members are discounted. I'm not saying it's this community, I'm just saying in general. So anyway, I'll leave that up to the Softgov group. I mean, I just popped in to see what was happening today, so I will pass it to. I don't know if Mario has spoken yet.
No, thank you, Radio. Edu, can you show me the two questions again, please? Okay, the first one, I believe the education that everyone is talking about is the solution. And the other one, well, I don't know too much about governance. I'm kind of new in this environment. Um, Probably I'm wrong, but I think that not everyone have to has a vote because, well, there is some interest on the community, and maybe if some persons are not involved with the community and vote, I can disturb all the intention of the all of the decisions we made in the past. And that's it. I'll pass it to Juanca.
Thanks, Mario. Yeah, I think this question is very interesting. I think like we should to talk about more, even more about governance. We should be open to talk about constraints, conflicts, and mistakes. Um, I feel like mistakes are really great learning opportunities, and one thing that I feel about governance is that even though that we are talking about the relevance of the human aspects of governance in these technological systems, there's still a strong technical deviation towards programming and towards undervaluing social sciences. So I think it's really important to allow new voices and new fields to and new areas of knowledge to be impactful in our system of ideas, because that's the only way that we can understand and recognize our own biases. I think, and related to the news of the DAO, I think that we should be prepared for these black swan events where the thing that we didn't expect to happen happened, and we should try our that our systems um, are capable of integrating that black swan event and turning it into a positive situation. Like, still continuing to talk about that same example, I think like if the DAO wouldn't have been hacked, and if it would have worked fine, maybe today the technical deviation will be even bigger. So those mistakes are things that we can learn and from which we can be stronger. Like I also think like that hack now led to more security procedures, led to actually talking formally about um, token engineering. So yeah, I think that we should take and talk more about the complexity of these systems and not only about the design that can be done on paper, because sometimes the paper can sustain everything and even simulations. So we should embrace more the complexity and talk more about it. Yeah, I think it's really important to continue talking about governance, and I'll pass to Durgadas.
Yeah, so I think from my perspective, I've kind of evolved my idea about the gravity group. It seems to me that things like the gravity group, um, that's great, and Nostrom's principles are great. I love the fact that that's true. Although I will say there's um, entirely too much politeness here. As I've kind of started to understand by participating in some other groups, folks like Tyson Yunkaporta, for example, when he talks about bringing native wisdom into these other areas, and his book Science Talk, it's one of the, the scariest things for natives to participate in is groups, colonized groups, because it's just all entirely too polite. We're all entirely too polite. There's just not nearly enough conflict to be healthy. So that's what their perspective is, and I feel like the uniformity of our politeness is in many ways a way that the thing that prevents us from actively and constructively and flexibly participating in conflict that would then produce a system that is more resilient and more flexible and more, and then it would be less of governance as it would be of a kind of homeostasis that we arrive at through this kind of creative disagreement. So yeah, so I've just, I think I've come out the other side of my recent conflicts, realizing that I think some of this, comes about as a result of that, and I've been looking at different ways in which this can happen. This stuff can happen, and I just think that you know that's also a way to get rid of some of the bystander effects that I went through and experienced, and that I think other people are experiencing too. Um, so yeah, there's a kind of a suppression by default that we don't even recognize within ourselves that we need to maybe think about. So yeah, we should be able to resolve conflict, but we should also be able to do that so well that we can actually actively and with autonomy and agency create conflict where necessary. So that's
Can
my
I
view.
can I can I ask you to get us an example that will you exemplify with, because there's folks here that maybe are new to this.
Mm-hmm.
So can you exemplify a little bit about an example of politeness or unnecessary politeness that we could filter out from our processes?
Well, again, I'm not beating Nate up about this, but there was a recent conflict where certain people knew about what was going on with me, and they just chose not to say anything because either they thought that it was uh, you know just being handled somewhere else, or there was just this kind of what I've noticed is if you read books about like why it's so difficult to talk to white people about race or things like this, the overriding thing is that there's a kind of suffocating politeness which exists in this situation, and I'm just suggesting that that is kind of the social vernacular of colonized systems, and I'm suggesting that perhaps if we're going to decolonize ourselves, what we need is a little bit more generative conflict. Does that help?
How do you? Yes. At the same time, I'll expand the question. How do we recognize when we are being excessively polite?
Well, if you're not saying something because you feel somehow that there's a social what do you want to say, sort of barrier or problem with that, I'll autistic people call it masking. That's just another term for kind of suppressing your authentic self because every DAO that I go into has a different kind of social vernacular, and what I'm suggesting is that what vernacular are we enforcing in our DAO, and I'm hoping that people will perhaps join other DAOs and see that that vernacular actually shifts, across things. So if you join 40 Acres DAO, for example, there's a very diverse. Basically, it's there for Black people, right? And so the idea there is that but the moment that I show up in any of those spaces, they code switch and change to me. Do you know what I mean? And it's like, that's the thing I don't want them to have to do, but yet they do that reflexively because that's being enforced upon them by their life experience. And what I'm suggesting is that all spaces have a kind of enforced for social, a code that you have to switch into, and it would be nice if that code was less rigid and so on. So I hope that, as an example, might help to clarify some of what I'm talking about. So I'm basically suggesting that because even the word like governance, right? We're talking about governance. Everyone who hears that hears a top-down, externally mandated, extrinsic reward thing, right? The word governance means that because we all come from these centralized systems. So even evolving the term governance to use something else that's more flexible, more decentralized, and less fraught with a built-in linguistic bias, could help to perhaps make us more into this flexible system that I'm thinking of.
I really like the concept of rather than having governance decision making. For me that was kind of a nice replacement for governance as a
Yeah,
word,
absolutely. Yeah.
and thinking on decision making as a replacement for that. Now I will pass it on to Septimus.
Before that, I'd like to add something.
Yes.
I'd like to go back to Mario's comment. I kind of stay. Like I was thinking about it. He says he's probably wrong about what he said, but I think he's he's got a really good point. I don't think. Well, I think everyone should have a vote, but I don't think everyone should be involved in everything. I think we are really used to how we usually like we got used to how like uh, conventional structures work, where they are vertical and you have people on top and people on top. Um, and I think when we are trying to be on top of each proposal, you are trying to reproduce that structure for your own. Because then you're like on the top of this community, overseeing everything that happens. When actually, the goal, for example, for platforms like Gardens, and I think the sort of some of the goals of conviction voting itself is distribute a community in a way where the one extreme doesn't have to know what the other extreme thinks, and so maybe it's not as important now because we are small. We don't have yet, I think, like a super wide community over the internet. But I think it's also important that we have that in mind when making any decision. You have to have the vote, but you should feel free and not necessarily encouraged to vote on everything. Just wanted to say that.
QNT. Would you like to comment on that, Mario, before we pass on the word to Septimus?
No, I'm okay.
Thank you. Back to you, Septimus.
Yeah, actually, like my thoughts are kind of aligned with ratios, and for me, like advice process is great, but like sometimes, like making a post in the forum post and saying it's advice process doesn't have to be like, I don't think it was Senti who was saying like people needs to be educated on the topic. It's important, but also people need to, like, sometimes people is just not checking the forums, so that means they are not aware, so they are not giving their input even if they are affected on that decision. So yeah, sometimes like they still need sometimes it feels like the vote give more legitimacy to a decision, especially like if it's affecting other people. And then but then and then if you have a success advice process with people who's affected, like they engage, the scenario I see like for ending up in a vote is like like I have an idea and I want to propose something, and then someone who's affected, like he thinks differently and he would not like it to happen, and then you still want it to happen, so you make a vote, and then it's up to the community regarding our governance parameters to decide like either if we push it or not. Yeah, those are my thoughts. I don't know how to pass it. Probably I was the last one. Back to you, Edu.
Can I add one
Can I
thing
add?
to that?
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to add something. Is it okay?
Yeah, go ahead, Gustavo.
Okay, cool. Thanks. Like for example, I just have this like thought, and it's related with what everyone has said also, but this is just like a thought just to think about. You know, it's just like a mental exercise. Like if I decided to go to the forum and read the posts and just go around and question why everything is being done the way it is done, would that be perceived as aggressive or as like conflictive, or is that okay? Like I don't even have like, I don't even have an idea if that is okay to do or not in terms of the way of governance that is being like
Definitely,
communicated in the DAO. Yeah.
Express yourself. Definitely, that's what
Yeah.
you want. That's how you improve the community.
Yeah,
Yeah,
nobody's
so-
going to be upset about that. Like,
Okay.
the entire advice process is designed for, you know, if you're going through the advice process and you post on the forum, anybody who engages in that, the intent behind that forum post originally is to get information. It's for signaling purposes. So if you question it, if you have questions, if you want to critique it, all those pieces of information that you're giving out are going to be taken into consideration by the person who posted that forum post and who is going through the intent of the advice process. And so like, please, like if please engage. That's the key. Is we're just trying to get information from the community, and if anything obvious or something that you missed or something that you glanced over or looked over could be found out, and we avoid a potential risk by just communicating. And so I think those activities are really important. But I wanted to add one more thing to this, in that, you know, full participation doesn't necessarily guarantee optimal outcomes for decisions that we have, and we need to keep that into consideration, because what I would like to see is that, you know, things like source credit are kind of the, you know, a potential solution for this problem, but like experts, you know, we want to have the people who are in the know, who understand the problem that you're trying to solve, having more weight and value associated with that particular decision. And so the advice process does this off chain, but we would like to try to do that on chain. And so like, it'd be really neat to see something like source cred be like, hey, you know, Durgados, you're Wonka, you guys are experts in conflict resolution, and if I'm doing something that involves some type of conflict, I want to hear your voices. I think your voices should have more weight than some person who just bought tokens the other day, and we don't have a way to actually do that yet. And so just by participating doesn't guarantee optimal outcomes, and that's what I want to stress here. And that we have to really find the people who are experts in these certain particular fields that are associated with the problem that you're trying to solve, and get their input as quickly as possible. But yeah, I just wanted to add that in terms of governance, because I think it's something we overlook all the time.
I actually think the other way around regarding experts, because experts can say whatever. Like, you know, maybe we have an expert that says, you know, oh, we should invest more in, I don't know, in Spain because blah, blah, blah. No, like, but then I really think, like, you know, skin in the games matter. And, you know, like, even if someone is an expert and knows more than you, like, it's your decision. Like, you know, like, probably there's a million people that know how to manage money more than myself, but, you know, my own money, I just want to manage it myself because it's mine, right? And then for the
And
commons,
so this is
I feel like
I don't disagree with you, Septi. I think you're right. I think that, you know, this is why we need to educate better on the advice process and the roles that we have, because the roles that we have are the stewards, the subject matter experts, and contributors. The stewards, at the end of the day, see a bigger picture, because we're involved in a lot more. We understand them a lot more. It's something that subject matter experts may not be able to see, and so they may be misinformed in terms of their guidance. But that guidance is very important for stewards, the combination of those two, to help contributors to make the best possible decision at that moment. And so right now, I think we have a very fractured understanding of what the advice process is, and we have a very fractured understanding of how the different roles in the TEC work. And that is something that I really, really want to push in terms of education right now, because the combination of those two things is what this entire process and setup is and structure is designed to solve. But if we don't apply it the correct way, and we don't have a good understanding and educate new members on this process and these roles, then it's completely broken process. So I just want to say that, you know, education, like most everybody has talked about so far, is very, very vital.
Thank you, Nate. Just briefly before you comment, NT, regarding what Gustavo answered, I think mentioned. I think this is a very good example of the excessive politeness that Durgaras mentioned. And I will put on the screen something that happened today. Softgov. If you go to the Softgov working group forum post, for example, you will see that this post on the forum hasn't been updated since like probably 2 years ago, and it doesn't have the link to the agenda. So I was basically looking for the agenda, and well, it is here, but it's Austrian principles and Minutes agenda. So if you were not excessively polite, as maybe Durgara's input mentioned, you will have provided this feedback, you know, or I will myself provide this feedback, but I myself skipped that and decided to just put the agenda on the calendar. So it's this kind of things that I think part of our cultural layer could be improved, so people don't feel this is a kind of a wall that stops them from doing something. Yes,
Yeah, I just want to say that the politeness thing kind of leads to people giving away their autonomy and their agency. And I'm just trying to remind everybody on this call that power, when we talk about power dynamics and the fact that I brought up, you know, certain conflicts and I'm publicly airing those and all the people who were involved. The reason why I'm doing that is because somebody said to me that I was speaking truth to power, and I was like, well, I was under the impression that there was nobody that was more powerful than another person in a decentralized autonomous organization, right? So the whole point is to actually reclaim our agency and autonomy and get away from and educate ourselves away from the reflexive giving away of our agency and autonomy, because all power is built from a person harvesting your autonomy and agency from you. In many cases, we're just not aware that that's the case. And so I'm just going to try to remind folks of that. Thanks.
Yes, Santi. And then you pass it on to Stream Nerd, who will be next after you. Go, Santi.
Okay, sure. I just wanted to comment on what Nate and Septimo said. I think both are the right. I think like uh, the phrasing and the education around what we put out to the community is really important as well. Like it's called I mean, in I'm just guessing right now, but it's advice process. It doesn't mean you have to take what they said for granted, for example. And so maybe you see the advice process image, and it looks like a really rigid way to operate inside the community, and perhaps uh, it could be shown in a way that reflects that it's not as rigid because I think when things like that, when decision making procedures become rigid, we risk uh, ending up as a technocracy. I think, and as and appreciate experts on every matter, but you know, communities don't always make sense, and that's how we have discovered a lot of things across time.
Yeah, and that's actually the solution for that I'm proposing is that we become less polite, you know, in many ways, or
Yeah,
less,
right.
you know, and so yeah, and that's also, you know, to incorporate things like liberating structures, not just to go around being a jerk to people, but having liberating structures and, you know, that kind of I'm all the time asked this about spiritual principles, right? You talk to somebody about Patanjali's, yoga sutras or whatever, and they'll be like, well, that's a commandment. Well, it's not a commandment. It's just the observation of the natural unfolding of a person in their spiritual growth. Do you know what I mean? And there's two ways to interpret everything, and I think we just need to do a better job reinforcing that. In fact, we're not doing that. And one way to do that is to not be polite and to see something and say something. The other is to put in liberating structures. So maybe not just say what your intentions and your distractions are, but we choose a liberating structure for the day and talk about it.
Thank you. Yes, Vince. I want to pass it to StreamNerd so I can give a space for everyone to speak, and then when we finish the rounds, and we go back to you, Vince.
Okay, sounds good. Sorry.
No worries. If you are there, streamer, I cannot hear you. You are muted. I will come down to.
Hello.
There you go.
I'll just listening in. It's great and inspired me so far. Was creating some form, if not like a survey. And the first page, express yourself from Charles Wright, with like a type form with the video also in the first page. Wouldn't be better. Yeah, learning a lot with you. Have a nice days and nights there. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Pass it on to Guyan.
Hey, thanks, Edu. Some really interesting discussions here. I'm appreciating everyone's perspective. I think I think I agree with what everyone says, even the apparently divergent perspectives. Not to sound overly polite, Durgadas, when I say that. But yeah, I see the truth in what everyone's saying, and I see there's a lot of really common threads. I think from my background studying sociocracy and seeing the value of that in organizations, I don't know if for people who aren't familiar with that, definitely recommend checking it out. There's a great website I'll post, Sociocracy for All, in the links. It's got some really good resources, and it's on governance, like pre-blockchain. How to make a flat organization, so to speak, how to lateralize power, that sort of thing. And one of the big things from that I think is applicable here is this idea that the people who are really going to be affected by the decision are the ones who should be making it. And the people that are most involved, hands-on with doing it, are, the primary decision makers, because that's where the intelligence is. And so then it takes the discernment to know, okay, well, who is this going to affect? Who do we need to consult around this decision? Because if it doesn't affect you, it can feel like a burden to be asked to decide. But if it does affect you, then it can feel like a insult or like an inconsideration to not be consulted. And so I think it's having the wisdom and discernment to know that and recognize it and be able to get these questions out to the right people. And of course, as people have stated, also the education that's involved with that. So yeah, that's my 2 cents to add to all the great wisdom I hear flowing around. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. And Acid Caven, welcome. I already explained you what the working group is about in our 101, but would you like to comment on something about governance or any of the folks here who has spoken?
Well, thank you to give me the word. Actually, a lot of have been said, so for sure education is important. I like the contribution of Durgadas saying, speaking about politeness and to be unpolite. And for sure, it is a point. I think people to be unpolite have to be to feel self-confident also, and that's not always the case. So maybe reinforce. Going to reinforce people and create a security, how to say, context where people can be unpolite, and that is fine, without being how to say, rude in a way. So yeah, that's my contribution. I would say I would add some working on the context to feel, so people can feel free to be unpolite.
Thank you. And Benz, we'd like to get back at you, comment that you were about to say.
Yeah, I think what Acid Coven was saying fits in, leads in nicely. I just had something to add to the impolite thing. It's also, I think there may be an element of like self-doubt too, like just like where something is, or just like raising that question. Like, for example, where does everyone on this call have access to this Softgov weekly agenda? And like, if you wanted it, like, why didn't you like ask? And part of that may be like, well, you know, it might be somewhere that I just haven't found it, and I'm missing it. I feel like this is something I do sometimes. So I'm just like putting that out there, that if you do have those questions, just go ahead and ask, because it highlights something, or could possibly highlight something like, oh, we're not putting this somewhere where it's widely accessible to everyone, you know. So that's just something I wanted to add.
Thank you, Benz. Does anyone wants to comment something else based on what was spoken? I will count down to 0. Yes, Juanca.
Yeah, I want to say two things. The first one is that after this call, we will be having a practice group on liberating structures with Lynn and Jeremy. So it's very connected to what we have been talking about having structures that can sustain agency and facilitating communication. So yeah, everyone invited. And the other that I wanted to say is that, yeah, I agree that sometimes we think that all conflict is negative, and that all conflict, and we tend to to suppress conflict. Um, like, but there's also generative and creative conflict, and also that the energy and the signal that is behind each of our interpretations um, should is something that can be added, and something that can be very nurturing to the system. So yeah, I agree with losing our fear, maybe to voice our thinkings, and yeah, to really act with the wordings that we say. Like, if we are saying that we don't want hierarchical systems, and that um, we promote that everyone is equal, we also in our behavior shouldn't feel that we need the support or the acceptance from other to do what we think. It's also to have some kind of to be a little bit rebel, and this is a very rebel space. So it's like being rebel in a rebel space.
And while we're on the subject, I just want to say I posted TEC source in the stewards channel. This is for all documents, including all agenda documents. And if you're in a working group and you're working on a document and it's not on the TEC source page, please make a pull request and I will merge it immediately.
All right. The other thing, I wanna ask openly, who here, you can just unmute yourself as a showing of you are one of these persons. Who here doesn't know about the TEC governance process or the TEC advice process? Just unmute yourself and I will count you in as someone who doesn't know about it. 5, 4, 3, 2. So 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, 5 people who are on Softgov doesn't know about our governance model. So there's a handicap that we should solve ASAP. So what we will do is that I will put in the agenda for Libby for next week to basically explain truly our governance and back and forth, so we can all be on the same page. Because if we want to educate, I mean, we should start by this same working group. Here, I will share later on the Softgov working group. Here is a graphic that explains a little bit of the actual governance process that we have at the moment regarding advice process, what it works for, what other governance systems do we have implemented, and these different spaces that this governance are used for. We have snapshot, we have token lock, we have the gardens, and then this could be maybe too complex, so it needs to be explained thoroughly. But in general terms, we have divided the process that everything in here in the TEC starts with advice process, and from that point on, based on the advice and on the consensus, then we translate that into a conviction voting or a TAO voting, and then we decide which platform fits that vote. And each of them are specific for something. For example, conviction voting are for funding. TAO voting is for the changing of the parameters of the commons, and so on. So the idea is that we can all understand this, and I think that one of the highlights of everyone's feedback is the education aspect, and thinking that we are about 10 to 12 people here and 5 or 6 of us doesn't know about this process, and it speaks about something that needs to be changed within the same working group. So if you all agree and look forward for next Tuesday, we will probably have a call explaining this process thoroughly, so you can ask questions about it and have an understanding fully of how the TEC governance works. Does anyone have something else you would like to comment on? 5. Yes, Lucas.
I just want to point out that we also need to just be careful in the way that we're doing our voting, that we try not to omnibus things where possible. So that's just my other caution. So in addition to all these other things, if we're going to spread this out and let more people get access and not be polite, yeah, just making sure we don't lump too many disparate things together when we're voting. So thank you.
Thank you, Durgaras. Does someone else have something else you would like to comment on, or something you would like to know about? I will count down to 0. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining here today. It was quite a very interesting conversation. The follow-up of this conversation will be a next session next Tuesday about the governance model of the TEC. Probably the first 30 minutes of the call, and then Livy will take on the rest of the 30 minutes. Thank you so much for your contributions. The working groups agendas are on top of every working group text channel in case you want to look for them. They are in the description of the working group in every text channel. So looking forward to see you all. Thank you so much for your collaboration and your words. Have a lovely Tuesday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Thanks a lot. Bye bye.